Hello, everybody. A couple of years ago, we did a show with a writer, Santi Elijah Holy, on the Shakur family. He had a book out. It was called An American Family spelt with a K. The Shakurs and the nation they created. It won a series of awards, very well received. Of course, the most famous Shakur is Tupac Shakur, and we're talking about him today with his latest biographer, Jeff Pearlman, who's a very distinguished sports writer, biographer. He is joining us from a loft in Los Angeles. Jeff, you probably saw an interesting piece in the LA Times suggesting that we may not need another Tupac book. Why did you decide to write your book on Tupac?
I would say the headline suggested it more than the article. It was actually kind of a weird headline because the article praised the book. So it's
yeah, no, I agree, and I didn't mean it critically.
No. I thought it was funny. Nobody needs another anything, but personally, there was a Tupac to write. I wanted to dig deep into his legacy. I wanted to interview a million people. I wanted to understand beyond the rumors and the gossip and the innuendo that assumes a person, famous people when they die young. And I just thought, I've written 10 sports books, try something different. Big Tupac fan, big music fan. So here I sit talking to you.
The book comes with a nice blurb from Chuck D. I knew him years ago, and it says, Jeff Pearlman breaks down Tupac's life like a veteran sports writer examining a dynasty. Is that what you bring to this narrative, Jeff? The sensibility of a sports writer? Did you approach Tupac's life as if he was a sports dynasty?
No, I think what happens is I think more than anything, I try to approach it as a journalist. And as a journalist, I really cut my teeth at Sports Illustrated covering Major League Baseball. And when you were at Sports Illustrated, you were writing on deadline. Your job was to interview a ton of people. You were supposed to find stuff beyond the story. You weren't just going to tell the obvious. You were supposed to find stuff that other reporters weren't finding. So I think I tried to bring that to this. I don't think it could have been sports. It could have been politics. In this case, I happen to be a rapper. I think we live in an age when reporting is increasingly scarce. People don't have the time for it. People don't have the patience to read long stuff. So I think when someone comes along and tries to do it, it stands out weirdly more than it used to.
Is there a kind of weird merging as well of sports and music and politics where you have these characters, whether it's a Tupac, a Donald Trump, or others who somehow exist in every category simultaneously?
Oh, definitely. I think what happens is, so I think if you're like in this job, in my career, you see celebrity up close. And after a while, you don't consider celebrities any different than whoever, your mom or your uncle. They're just people. But I think, especially in America, but probably most places in the world, we hold celebrity as such a ridiculously high standard that we decide that these people are almost mythical and magical and have these powers and they cross over and they can do everything. And that could be LeBron James, that could be Tupac, it could be Taylor Swift, it could be Trump or Obama. And it's really weird. And I actually think part of writing a book is in a way breaking that down a little bit and showing you that all these people go to the bathroom and they go to the supermarket and they get sad and frustrated and anxious just like you do. I think that's a big part of writing biographies, actually, is humanizing people.
Yeah, I just saw a couple of days ago the biopic of Bruce Springsteen.
Was it good?
Yeah, it is good because it makes him remarkably ordinary, very mundane, his life and his attitudes and even his attitude towards fame. So it's not just unique within this family, although, as I said, I don't know much about actually the Shakurs. I really enjoyed the conversation with Santi Elijah Holly, and I was particularly intrigued by his description of Afeni Shakur, the matriarch, I guess, of the family, Tupac's mom. Mm-hmm. Do you think the fact that he was from this kind of dynasty, this celebrity dynasty, a political celebrity dynasty, shaped him, made him almost ready for the mythological journey that he experienced, which you can probably only make in America?
Well, I don't really think he was ready for the whole mythology thing. I think in a way, the reason he died so young is because it gobbled him up. But I do think what having his mom did was made him understand what it is to try and be a revolutionary and what it is to try to stand for something and fight back when people are against you. Like his mom was pregnant and being shuttled back and forth from jail to a New York courthouse to stand trial with 20 other Black Panthers at the time who were being accused of plotting all these bombings. She turned down a court-appointed attorney, even though she didn't have a high school diploma, and somehow she won. And I think his mom was really informed Tupac onto what he was, not just sort of musically and messaging and music, but just what he wanted to do, which was uplift his fellow Black men and women in America and raise them to a higher level and remind them to keep fighting and don't just take life for granted.
How much did she shape Tupac, and what are you saying in only God can judge me, that hasn't been said before about Tupac's relationship with his mom?
Well, there's a lot of stuff that has been said. I think what a lot of people misunderstand about Tupac, I really do believe this because I was one of them, is I don't think they understood the trauma he went through. Like, people would say, well, he was the son of a Black Panther, therefore blah, blah, blah. But I think what they miss is the trauma of having your hero, this woman, this former Black Panther who was just a badass of a woman, then descend into crack addiction. So you're watching your hero become this thing that's unrecognizable and zombie-like. And I think a lot of people, they just talk about Afeni like she was a goddess. And the truth of the matter is she was a very flawed woman who, for all her greatness, had many, many problems as a mother. And I just think people miss that. I really do. I think they just say, she's a Black Panther. Tupac, he's the off-child of a Black Panther, not understanding all the contradictions, conflicts, hardships that come with that.
So very briefly, Jeff, tell us about Tupac's life. Because not everyone will be familiar with it. As you say, it was a short life packed with all sorts of incidents, fame, violence, death, success, failure.
The question, very briefly, tell me about Tupac's life, is like, in a couple of seconds, give me a tour of the Grand Canyon. Let me just see the highlights. There's a lot. I mean, again, he was the son of a Black Panther. He lived in incredible hardship, poverty, sadness, the lack of a father figure, first in New York City, then in Baltimore, then Marin City. He really was a theater arts kid. Like, that's something I think a lot of people don't understand. When he was growing up, he went to the Baltimore School of the Arts. Then he was in a very advanced theater program in Marin County, California. And he was a poet, and he wrote beautiful poetry, and he loved dancing, and he was like this kid, this free spirit who lived this beautiful, beautiful life. But when he was entering his senior year of high school, he was relocated to Marin City, which was really one of the crack hotspots in America. And his mom descends into crack addiction. Tupac has to find his own way. He really gets involved in West Coast rap and kind of rides this train to join this group Digital Underground and ultimately become a solo artist. But there's so much in between there. But he really is a rise from the ashes and then very young death after he goes to prison.
Yeah, I wonder. I assume you've seen the new movie. It's obviously not about Tupac. One battle after another, which, clearly enough, could be seen in parallel or can be seen as a kind of comparison with Tupac's life. Different in some ways and similar in others. You talk about his mom as this goddess of the Black Panthers. This is a movie which is probably the most successful movie of the year. It's going to clean up in the Oscars, focusing on, if not a similar narrative, a similar theme and a similar period. Have you seen the film?
I did. It's definitely a good comparison. I just think, like, when people look at the Black Panthers, they mainly think about men. In fact, when they think about the civil rights struggle, they mainly think about men. Yeah, you think about Rosa Parks, but mainly you think about Martin Luther King and John Lewis and Malcolm X, etc. And with the Black Panthers, you're thinking almost exclusively about men. And she was this woman who rose and represented herself and just had a huge chip on her shoulder for all good reasons, and just wasn't going to take any shit from the man, basically. And much like the movie, there's just
not the heroine, or the sort of, I don't know if you would call it the heroine in One Battle After Another.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there are parallels. I think it's I don't know if they were thinking about Afeni Shakur, but I think there's certainly comparisons where if Tupac were alive and he saw that movie, he'd probably think, oh yeah, they got something from my mom right there.
Although the character in One Battle After the Other, this very beautiful, very dramatic Black Panther, female Black Panther, turns out not to be quite as heroic as she initially appeared. Mm. Is that also true of Afeni Shakur?
I just think people are very, 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 very complicated. And to me, she was just as heroic as she appeared, actually. I think she was beyond brave and principled and hardened and willing to fight and willing to die for a cause. But I also think she got caught up in addiction. And I also think she was a product of a lot of trauma. Like, one thing about this book that was very eye-opening to me as a white guy who grew up in kind of the sticks of rural New York is just the levels of trauma that all these people endured and had to overcome and had to fight through just to function with some level of sanity. And she was poor and Black, growing up in North Carolina during a lot of racial strife. Her son was poor and Black, watching his mom succumb to addiction. Like, it's not easy to rise from this. So when people look at Afeni Shakur and say, well, she wound up a crack addict, or she wasn't a great, she wasn't Mrs. Brady as a mother, it would have been impossible for that to happen. She just wasn't. That's not how. The trauma was just so much for her that what she became, to me, remains incredibly heroic.
She, of course, was deeply political. It defines her life. We don't remember Shakur quite as politically, but for you, in terms of his biography, how political was he, and what exactly were his politics?
So he was very aware. I mean, he read and read and read. So he was a voracious reader. I'll tell you a story from the book real quick. He was on tour one time with a group he had called Thug Life. And one of their groups they were on tour with was a group called Lords of the Underground. And one day he and one of the rappers from Lords of the Underground named Dupre Kelly got in a altercation, just an argument. And they kind of split angrily. And a few minutes later, Dupre Kelly is in his motel room and he hears a knock on the door. This is in Florida, and it's Tupac. And Dupre Kelly is kind of nervous. What does Tupac want? Well, he lets Tupac in. And Tupac's holding a couple of 40s, and he gives one to Dupre Kelly. And he says, I didn't like how you talked to me back then, but I love that you stand up for yourself and you stand up for your guys. We all have to do that. We need to stand up for each other. He's like, and more than that, we need to get political. You need to represent New Jersey. I need to represent Oakland. Ice Cube needs to represent LA. We need to get political. In fact, we need to run for office one day. Kelly's like, what do you mean? He's like, we need to just abide by the laws. We need to make the laws. And we need to make sure the laws are looking out for Black people like us. Like, it's ridiculous. We need to make the laws. So we need to run for office. And as Dupre Kelly was telling me this, he was a Newark, New Jersey city councilman. And he told me that Tupac Shakur's talk all those years ago was the thing that set him on his political journey. So I think Tupac was very political. He bashed Donald Trump in an interview back then, way before Trump had any politics. But he also just was very focused on music and art at the same time.
It's interesting that anecdote comes with him handing out, you said, a gun?
Say that again? No, a 40-ounce, a drink.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Whoops. So he wasn't giving out guns.
No, 40, a drink. Yeah.
Had he lived, Tupac, do you think ultimately he might have gone into politics?
I asked someone he knew very well the other day, we were talking about it, and he said he thinks he would have become like a great, great actor, which I agree with. I think he was on the fringe of being an Academy Award-winning actor. Jim Belushi actually said that to me. And I do think, I mean, it's hard to say what a 25-year-old person is at 54. But I think, for example, out here in LA, where you have masked ICE agents grabbing people, particularly brown people, and taking them away in unidentified vehicles without giving them cause. I can't imagine Tupac Shakur of any age just sitting back and watching it, or being content because he made money, or saying, no, I can't be bothered because I have a movie to film. So I don't know if he would be Governor Tupac Shakur or Congressman Tupac Shakur, but I certainly think he would be on the forefront of sort of what's going on now in this kind of dystopian America we live in.
You mentioned the movies. The two that particularly come to mind are 1992 Juice and 1993 Poetic Justice. How good an actor was he? I mean, is that one of the things we should remember him for?
Awesome. I'm not just saying that. I thought Tupac Shakur was a great, great actor. Juice was a really good movie. I wouldn't say he was ever in a great movie. Some people disagree with me, but Tupac Shakur. I mean, Tupac. He wasn't even supposed to audition for Juice. That was he accompanied a friend who was reading for it. And the woman, the casting director, asked if he wanted to read, and he just blew them away. And he's so good in that movie. He's the most memorable part of that movie by far. And then Poetic Justice was the director John Singleton's follow-up to Boys in the Hood. And it's not a very good movie. It's pretty crappy. Janet Jackson, she's fine. You know, Joe Torre's fine. But Tupac, as a postal worker named Lucky, just sizzles. He absolutely sizzles. And to me, the role of his life was he played a heroin addict named Spoon in a movie called Gridlocked. And the movie isn't great, but he stars across from Timothy Roth, who is a wonderful actor, and Tupac carries the screen. So I think he was great.
What about on the music front? Obviously, the title of your book, Only God Can Judge Me, is taken from a 1996 film.
A song. It's a song.
Sorry, I meant a song rather than a film. What conclusions did you come about his musical contribution?
I mean, there was a guy, he was in a group called Digital Underground, and they had their lead rapper at the time, young, was a guy named Shock G. And Shock G really summed up Tupac well. And he said, I'll paraphrase, but he said, some people rap from the nose and some people rap from the throat, but Tupac rapped from the stomach, like from the gut. And I feel like he really had this way where it was a visceral feel to his sound. And what he was rapping about felt like a texture. And he just was spitting it out right at you, almost like punching you in the face. And I mean, some of his songs I would say were kind of misguided. Some of his later songs on All Eyes on Me, a later album, I think he really wanted to move people. I think he did move people. I think he wanted to touch people. I think he did touch people. I think people felt something visceral about his rapping style. So I think that's what it was. He was very real, and he lived a very real life. He was very accessible. He wasn't behind a gate. He wasn't behind tinted windows. He was very accessible. And I think combined with his style of rapping, it made people very much gravitate toward him.
Do you remember the first time you heard his music, his rap?
Yeah, it was the song Brenda's Got a Baby. And I was early college. And I remember I did not like the CD cover because I was a tape or CD in Tupacalypse Now. And I thought, what is this? Tupacalypse? I didn't even get it at the number 2. But the song, the more you listen to Brenda's Got a Baby, especially back then when it was new, you could not be kind of moved by the story and the song and his storytelling. And again, he has a voice. It's just different. You know, in all mediums, there are people who sound the same. Plenty of people sound the same. I don't think it's possible to mistake another artist for Tupac. I don't care if a million AI-generated Tupac rap songs come along in the next 6 months. I don't think you'll be able to duplicate what he had.
And what about his role in Death Row Records? What do you write about that? How important a chapter was that in his life?
Very. I mean, he was in prison. He was at Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York. And Suge Knight of Death Row Records paid his bail, flew him to Los Angeles. He went straight to the studio his first day after stopping for a steak, recorded 7 songs on his first day out of prison, including 2 really big ones. Death Row provided him with amazing producers, amazing sound engineers, amazing artists to work with. He did probably his best music at Death Row. At the same time, Death Row was run much more like the mafia or a gang than a record label. Suge Knight was very demanding in what he wanted and what he expected. And what he expected out of Tupac was a hardcore Death Row album. So any of Tupac's ambitions about writing an album about maybe Black empowerment or the civil rights movement or the Black Panthers was kind of spit out the window. And the album he did was, you know, a gangbanging, blunt smoking, Hennessy drinking, hardcore gangster rap album. So I think he did his best music, but I can't say Suge Knight was the best influence on his life. And ultimately, you know, he died as a Death Row artist.
What about his? I mean, we talked already about his mother. What about his attitude to women? Obviously, the rap community, a great deal of controversy in terms of attitudes to women, particularly some of the stars. What did you uncover, if anything, in the book? Only God Can Judge Me.
I think he's kind of a mixed bag. I mean, on the one hand, he had some songs, Dear Mama, Keep Your Head Up, that were devotional toward women. There are two women in particular who I wrote about who were really going under trouble, two friends of his from back in the day, who he moved out to Los Angeles to get out of dangerous situations, put them up, housed them, fed them, supported them. He could be amazing with women. There are women I interviewed who just raved about him as the perfect gentleman and guardian and hero. And then at the same time, he did go to prison for an alleged sexual battery. He wrote a lot of songs that degraded women at the same time. Sometimes it's hard to listen to some of his words and listen to some of his other words, or see something he does and do something else he did and think, oh, this guy was this or this guy was that. I think ultimately he was a 25-year-old guy with a bunch of mixed messages who, sometimes treated women beautifully and sometimes did not.
What was your attitude when you were researching the book, Jeff? You did a lot of interviews. I mean, a lot of people come to someone like Tupac with their minds already made up one way or the other. You clearly didn't, although you were enthusiastic about him. You believed he was a man of great significance. Otherwise, you wouldn't have spent some time on this. But what was your attitude in terms of having conversations with people who presumably had already pretty much made up their mind about Tupac?
I think more than anything, I was surprised how sad it all was. I didn't expect this to be a sad book. Like, I didn't go into this thinking this is really going to break my heart. But I think more than anything, his story is heartbreaking. I think he was used by a lot of people. I think he was alone a lot. He died without very much money. He died way too young. I think he really wanted to be accepted in a way that he wasn't. I think he wanted to be understood in a way that he wasn't. I just think the guy had so much potential. He did a lot already, but he had so much potential to be so many great things. I just think life kind of gobbled him up. So at the end, everyone I had read the book, my proofreaders who've read my sports books, they all were like, God, this book is so sad. It's just sad. The weight he carried is so sad. I still feel that way. So at the end of the day, I find Tupac very heartbreaking.
So that's what you know now that maybe you didn't know when you began the project.
Correct. Yeah, correct. Just how sad it was. I didn't know. I had no idea. But again, it's a weird situation being a white guy who grew up in middle class, rural America, writing about Tupac. It's kind of like, how would I know? I never experienced that level of trauma. I never had to worry about someone shooting me through a window. I'd never had to worry about my mom getting hooked on crack because the dealer's knocking on our door. Like, I didn't have any of that. So all I could do with this book is have as open a mind as possible, talk to as many people as possible, and just hope that I could absorb as much as possible. That's it. And it was really sad. It was just heartbreaking. The whole thing was heartbreaking.
You've written, as I said, and you noted this at the beginning, a lot of books about sports stars. The last one was The Life and Myth of Bo Jackson, a African-American sports star. So you're familiar with poverty. You're familiar with the African-American community. What was different about the mythology, if you like, of somebody like Tupac? I mean, not somebody, Tupac himself, and somebody like Bo Jackson.
I mean, I think Bo Jackson was raised poor in rural Alabama, in Bessemer, Alabama, outside of Birmingham. Tupac was raised poor in the inner city. Bo Jackson had a mother who was extremely supportive and a father who lived across town and wasn't very supportive. Tupac also had a supportive mother, but a mother, again, who became a crack addict, something Bo Jackson didn't have. Bo Jackson, from the beginning, was always living in the same address, getting the same education at the same schools, knew he was going to go to college because of his athletic talents. In fact, his mother insisted he go to college because very few people from that family had gone to college. Tupac drifted from school to school to school to school. Sometimes his mom was clean. Sometimes his mom wasn't clean. So I think they both had experiences of what it is to be poor and black and struggle in America back in the relatively same time period. I just think Bo Jackson, at the end of the day, if nothing else, had a sober parent in a stable household and a routine and familiarity of his life that Tupac never had. Tupac never really owned a home or had a home he could call a regular home until he was living in LA near the end of his life. So his whole life was just waywardness.
He ultimately died, as you say, very young, shot 5 times in the lobby of a recording studio first, and then shot dead. What does the narrative and the biography tell us about violence in America? I know that's a rather dumb question, but what did it teach you about violence? Only God can judge me in the story of Tupac. I mean, he's obviously a commentator on violence. He's from a violent culture, a violent community, maybe even a violent family. So is violence the central, in an odd way, the central narrative in the biography?
No, the central narrative is, to me, poverty and trauma, not violence. And I wouldn't say his mom was violent. I wouldn't even say he was, habitually violent. He had violent moments in his career, in his life. I think the number one thing I learned in that regard, honestly, and this is kind of weird and a little bit micro, is I had a pretty strong education on gang culture in Southern California, which I knew nothing about. So I learned about affiliations. I learned about colors. I learned about funding of record labels via, gang members and different sort of elements like that. And it was kind of an eye-opening thing for me because I didn't know anything about that. Again, kid from the sticks in New York. I've lived in California a long time. Certainly was never in a gang, never invited. So I think that was the biggest education for me is gangs. And also, like, I do think there's this thing, just like with the Black Panthers, like, oh, he was in a gang, he must be an awful person, or how could you talk to someone from a gang? Just like, how can you talk to someone from Death Row Records, or how can you talk to someone who's in prison? And I think the longer you live this life and the longer you do this job, you do realize that people are people. We all have different journeys. We all have different experiences. And at the end of the day, we're all just kind of seeking comfort, love, acceptance, and we all just have different journeys. And I interviewed many, many former gangbangers who were wonderful guys, many former drug dealers who were wonderful guys. And they grew up in a system and an environment that made it very tough for them. And unlike me, who knew every day I could go play baseball with my friends on a grassy field, these guys were in the middle of crack overtake in Marin City.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on the Black Panther front. In particular, we did a show a few weeks ago with somebody who went to jail for 40 years innocently in Minnesota, in Mississippi, and he was taken in by the Black Panther inmates of the prison, educated and taught to survive. So I think it's an important point. You note that it's a very sad story, but he must have had moments of happiness. What are the most cheerful stories, or maybe the most cheerful story about Tupac that you like to tell people? Maybe not so much about his potential, but how when, even in this short, tragic life, there were moments of great happiness or lucidity or humor.
Mm-hmm. I think, first of all, he made it. Like, he actually made it. He had a dream. He went after it hard and he made it. And there's this moment, he basically is like trying to figure out what to do with his life. And he gets offered a slot with the rap group Digital Underground to join them on a tour. And it's the Big Daddy Kane Chocolate City Tour, 1990. And all of a sudden he's this kid from the projects with an addict mom, and he's on the road. He's going to Lafayette, Louisiana. He's going to Birmingham, and he's going to Atlanta on a bus with all these famous rap stars he loved as a kid, not that long ago, because he still is a kid. And suddenly it's him. And this kid who was like an ugly duckling through much of his schooling is suddenly having sex left and right with groupies. And, the tour would go to a new city and they'd all gather in the lobby of a hotel if there was a piano there. And they'd all stand around, and Shock G, the head of Digital Underground, would play piano. And there'd be rap battles between Tupac and different guys. And like, to be 18, 19 years old on the road, getting paid decent money with your heroes, playing shows, standing in front of an audience, was Tupac's absolute dream. It's like, even though he died a horrible and horribly young death, I do think he was able to live out his dream, which was become a famous person, but also a famous musician, famous rap star. I think you're muted. I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Jeff, what about his, sorry, I'll repeat the question. What about his attitude towards his family? As I said, we did a show a couple of years ago with Santi Elijah Holly on An American Family, the Shakurs and the nation they created. Did he think of himself as part of a dynasty?
I don't know. I think he viewed himself as, yeah, actually, sure. I think the Shakur name carried a lot of weight to him. I think he saw himself as part of a legacy of the Black Panthers and of freedom fighters in America. I think that's what he saw more as, more than, yes, I'm a Feni Shakur's son, but I'm part of this lineage of Panthers and freedom fighters. And, he was named after Tupac Amaru Shakur, who himself was a freedom fighter way back in Spain. So, yeah, I think he carried his name seriously. I think he carried his origin seriously. I do. Absolutely.
And then when we look back at his legacy, is there this narrative of the Panthers themselves having such an influence on culture and politics, maybe even sports, that he is a receptacle for that in a kind of curious way, adding a uniqueness, a dynamism to American culture that it otherwise wouldn't have?
I don't think that has to do with the Panthers. I think, unfortunately, in this country, if you're a white person, you're most probably, if you have even been taught about the Panthers, you're taught about, oh, they hated white people, they were horrible, they were terrorists. Like, that's kind of the narrative, especially under this nonsense we're living in right now. And so I don't think like Tupac has added to the Panther narrative in America. I think his mother should and isn't taught about it all, but I think she should be. I think more people view Tupac as this guy who just would fight back against the man and stood up to anyone. And maybe he was misguided. Maybe he was dumb at times. Maybe he was impulsive. Actually, there's no maybe about all those things. That's who he was. But at the same time, he was a warrior, and he stood up, and he wouldn't just watch someone. He wouldn't watch a young black man being beat up by cops and stand by. He wasn't passive. He was do something right now, do something. So I just think, I don't know if that's related to the Panthers as far as his legacy, but I think that's 100% who he was because of his Panther upbringing.
So he was a hero in your view. I mean, your last book was called The Last Folk Hero, about Bo Jackson, but in a way, Tupac is, I mean, not a bigger hero, a different kind of hero.
I think he's heroic, and I think he's flawed, and I think he's tragic, and I think sometimes he was awful, and I think he's all the above, I mean, for me, again, I love hip hop. I love his music. I think it really speaks to a lot of people, even a white sports writer in his 50s. I just think a lot of people of it. So musically, he's heroic. Some of his actions, he's very heroic, and some of them, I shake my head and think, I wish he had done something differently. People are complicated. It's just a reality. People are very complicated and multi-tiered, all of us.
And in terms of this legacy, are there musicians, actors, thinkers, activists, entrepreneurs perhaps around who are still carrying Tupac's legacy?
I think Kendrick Lamar, to a certain degree, is musically. I think he would love, what's his name, Mamdani in New York City. I think he'd be right up.
Oh, he would?
Oh, he first of all, he was, Tupac was definitely pro-Palestinian as far as his sympathies. And that's not, I'm a Jewish guy. I have no problem. I'm just saying, definitely was. And I think that would really speak to him, that movement. I bet he'd probably like AOC, probably like Bernie Sanders. He was, when Tupac was in high school, his girlfriend for a good amount of time was a member of the Socialist Party in Baltimore. So, he was that kind of kid.
And finally, Jeff, got to ask you this, and that's again a bit of a dumb question, but what would he say or do in Trump's America?
I think 25-year-old Tupac who died would be horrified but not surprised. You know, he was raised to be skeptical of white culture, white America, the sort of certainly power and the you know, gathering of money into minimal sources. I think he'd be an outspoken advocate for the little people. I think he'd be 100% getting arrested at ICE, you know, roundups. I think he'd be just like me, furious about it all. Absolutely furious about it all, just like me, furious about it all. And maybe not dumbfounded because he was probably smarter than I was and probably saw it coming, but I'm definitely dumbfounded.
And what would you think of a Biden or a Harris?
I actually don't know. I honestly don't know. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It'd be hard for me to say. You probably see them as corporate shells who don't stand up enough for the people. That's my guess. I don't know.
Well, there you have it. The Many Lives of Tupac Shakur, Only God Can Judge Me by Jeff Pearlman. I think he articulates a great deal of passion about one of America's most remarkable young men who was taken too early. So congratulations, Jeff, on the book. And I will look forward. Are you going to go back to sports for your next project, or are you now?
I don't know yet. I actually don't know yet. Yeah, I don't know. I have to figure it out. Yeah.